Welcome to Ideas of India, a podcast where we examine academic ideas that can propel India forward. My name is Shruti Rajagopalan, and this is the 2023 Job Market series where I speak with young scholars entering the academic job market about their latest research on India. I spoke with Rithika Kumar, who is a postdoctoral visiting fellow at the Kellogg Institute for International Studies at the University of Notre Dame. She received her PhD in political science from the University of Pennsylvania in August 2023. Her research lies at the intersection of gender, urbanization, and politics in India. We discussed her job market paper titled Left Behind or Left Ahead, and also spoke about the feminization of politics, the political and social impact of migration, norms holding back women, and much more. For a full transcript of this conversation, including helpful links of all the references mentioned, click the link in the show notes or visit mercatus.org/podcasts. Hi, Rithika. Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Shruti, and thanks for organizing this for job market candidates. It's definitely a great forum. Thank you.
I want to get right into your job market paper, and you are basically looking at a phenomenon in India which is sort of huge, internal migration within India and relatively understudied. And you are in particular looking at Bihar, where you're looking at the impact of men's out-migration and how that impacts the women, in particular the wives who are left behind in managing the household, right? And you find that male out migration actually leads to an increase in female claim making. Because now the women who are left behind actually need to, make demands from state actors and institutions. They need to actually get the claims that they are entitled to through welfare services and so on. And the effect you find is kind of big, and it truly surprised me. You find that women with migrant husbands are 17% more likely to make these claims relative to those with co-resident husbands, right? So what is the underlying mechanism that's leading to this effect?
Yeah, Shruti, thanks for that, introduction. So my job market paper, which is kind of part of my larger dissertation book project, looks at how male migration, which is a huge phenomenon, not just in India, but actually across the global south. And given that migration is a pretty gendered kind of, phenomenon, how that's affecting local politics and political engagement in migrant sending communities through a gendered lens. And what I'm particularly saying, and maybe this is like a one sentence kind of, summary of my argument, is that male migration is leading to what I call is the feminization of everyday political engagement, and which is kind of defined by the heightened presence of women in these male-dominated, political arenas. And this is particularly striking, given that, these are like highly, patriarchal contexts that we are looking at. And what does this feminization, look like? It's as simple as, going to your ward member, who's your first kind of point of contact with the state, and asking them for a document or a signature, or it could be representing your household for some kind of theft in the court, or it could just be going to the block, making multiple trips to get an Aadhaar card, right? So a lot of this is now being done by women because their husbands are not around, and this is what I call kind of the feminization that is occurring in the political space. And my argument really is that male migration is removing the significant barrier that exists in women's lives, and that's their husband, right? Because there are a lot of norm-based restrictions that are imposed on women just by the presence of their husbands. And so this absence, even if temporary, can actually usher in political engagement. And this is an important pathway that we should be kind of considering. And I'm suggesting that in their absence, there are these norm-based restrictions that are kind of eased, and women can access the social sphere and get access to information, skills, networks, all of which kind of propel their political engagement, and particularly in areas that I'm looking at, which is engagement with the state. And very importantly, actually, there's this huge body of work that has looked at male absence in the context of war, where we know that it led to, an increase in labor force participation, also ushered in the right for women to vote and all of that, and other conflict contexts where also there's this indefinite absence of men. And a lot of authors and like the scholarship there has kind of established that women must be, holding economic leadership positions before experiencing this form of political empowerment. And I'm actually arguing that because of this social exposure that women get in their husband's absence due to migration, women don't really have to be economically empowered before being politically empowered, more so because this migration that their husbands are doing is for economic reasons. They are still the primary breadwinners of the family. So I'm arguing that, there's this other channel that can also usher in political engagement, and that is something that we should be looking at. And of course, like with most political science dissertations, I use a range of methods. So there's a lot of qualitative data collection that did go into this project, and my field work was primarily conducted in Araria district in Bihar, which actually shares a border with Nepal and is a high migration region. And I also use data from two original surveys, and one of them had an embedded survey experiment, and of course use the national level panel data set, which is the Indian Human Development Study that a lot of social scientists, use to provide some evidence on the effect of migration on women's lives across different dimensions. And the effects are pretty striking. And as you already said, that women are kind of politically empowered. And as I was explaining, there are, however, some kind of caveats, or you can say some factors that could moderate the overall effect. And one of them is primarily the fact that a lot of this migration is happening in contexts where joint families are fairly common. So the presence of an older family member or an in-law can have a moderating kind of effect on it, on the overall effect on political empowerment. And there's also the return of men, which can, make it seem like there's some kind of going back to the status quo, but there are some effects that persist. So it's a very nuanced kind of, effect that is occurring on women's lives. And what I say is that it's kind of a constrained yet very positive effects.
A lot of the survey data that you've collected is talking to women, right? And the view is trying to get a sense of what are women's preferences when it comes to, being more active in the political sphere. And the second part of it is what are their constraints in being more active in the political sphere? And that's what you're trying to capture through the survey. Now, is there another way to think about this question, which is in terms of how female capability is viewed within the household or within the marriage unit, right? So one way of asking the question is, are men who are married to women who they think are more capable of advocating for the household in the political sphere more likely to migrate, right? And it's actually, you're capturing the opposite of what one thinks you're capturing, right? How do you separate that effect from what is actually going on with women in terms of their preferences and constraints?
Right. So, of course, we know that, migration in many ways is endogenous, and it's very hard to kind of randomize migration or, there are studies that have created some incentives in that sense. So what I do to, get around this, yes, I do conduct like a cross-section survey, like my own surveys were like cross sections, but to get around some of these issues that might arise from endogeneity, in that maybe it's the capabilities of the women that are driving the results rather than migration, what I do is I use the panel data set, the national level panel data set, which is the Indian Human Development Study, which is of course a great data resource, repository for anybody studying India, and most social scientists would know that. I used the first two waves of this survey, and the survey kind of tracks the same households across two waves. So that lets us control for some of the time invariant, confounding factors, and mostly like innate abilities, etc., that could perhaps be leading to these results or something like that can confound these results. And what I do is that I take the data from the women's questionnaire. So they survey one woman in every household, and they also have information on the migration status of every household member. So I take this woman and I match her with her husband, and I can get the migration status of her husband. And what I do is that gives me effectively two groups of women. So one group of women is women whose husbands in the first wave resided with them when the survey was being conducted. And in the second wave, they were migrants when the survey was conducted, right? So in effect, this forms my treatment group in that they are treated with migration in the second wave. And then you have the control group, that's the second group, where these women, their husbands co-resided with them in both waves of the survey, right? So with that, I use a very simple 2-period, 2-group difference in difference model. And I kind of look at the effect then of this treatment of migration on women's political engagement as much as I can with the IHDS that's very limited, and other dimensions like their bargaining power, decision making, financial kind of, access and things like that. And I, of course, do a bunch of checks because even with different diff designs, there are multiple other kind of caveats. So there are robustness checks that I do with, conducting some trends on pre-treatment trends. I also kind of, just going back to your question on like, is it about the women more than migration? One of the things that I also do is that I just compare women whose husbands were always kind of co-resident with them and the ones whose husbands returned. And I find that there is kind of convergence, when these men return home along these different indicators to the same levels as the ones who were co-residing with their husbands in both waves, which really goes to say that there is something about migration that is happening. And of course, I validate a lot of my, findings with my own survey, which kind of is an addition or a supplement to the IHDS analysis. And another thing that I also do is that I conducted this survey experiment, which just kind of progressively removes the presence of household members and kind of identifies whether women are then picked. So you see that particularly when the husband is removed, in a household setup, women are more likely to be picked to like carry out a certain political task. So all of this together, really says that there is something about migration and there is something about this like male absence that migration is creating that we need to look at when we think about political engagement. Of course, there's a huge body of work in the humanities and sociology and anthropology that has looked at it from other dimensions. And I'm kind of also providing like a political angle to this.
The way I interpret your results is it is not about innate characteristics of the women, because that gets, worked out. It is also not about the capability, because the assumption is they aren't fundamentally changing in capability between the two rounds. And they're also not fundamentally changing in capability when the husbands are back, right? It's not like all the capacities they've developed have suddenly gone away. So the way you would set it up is most, if not all, women have some baseline preference for political engagement. And what is stopping them is all these household constraints. And the moment the constraints are lifted, they actually participate in the political arena. The moment the constraints are, back on top, because the husband's back or the son is of age, or so on. Or, someone younger in the family gets married and there's another male member now close by or in the neighborhood to look at these things. Suddenly those constraints are back on the women and the women stop being as active as they would have been in the political arena. Is that a good way to think about this?
In a sense that yes, and that's the whole point of that survey experiment which I was looking at, which kind of talks about just household constraints as defined by the presence of certain, household members, and where I find that the presence of the husband specifically is particularly restrictive for women. And I think going to your question on, I think this can also perhaps answer some, questions about like what happens when men come back and how temporary or persistent these results are, right? So how much of it is maybe lasting? So what I do find is that on certain indicators, specifically actually on bargaining power within the household, which is, a very important kind of indicator of female empowerment, even when their husbands come back, that exposure to migration, at least, on those indicators, definitely seems to persist, even after, men come back. And men also, like once women have had this experience of male absence of their husbands, and their husbands are away and, they're usually back home for a couple of months a year, they do recognize the importance of the information that their wives have gained in their absence and the knowledge that they have gained. And this is like evidenced through multiple interviews where migrants themselves acknowledge that women perhaps know more. So there is, I think with respect to the migration, I think there is this, certain level of constraint that women do feel in their husband's presence. But that exposure to migration can also, even upon a migrant's return, can still have certain persisting effects. But yes, I do agree that the presence of certain family members and consequently some normative kind of concerns can be particularly restrictive for women's mobility. And there's been I'm not the only one saying this, and there's been research, across the South Asian context on this. Yeah.
Women are now more politically active. But on the other hand, women who have migrant husbands are less likely to participate in the labor force outside of the household, right? Because one of the things that you do find is that women who have migrant husbands, they increase the household farm labor, by 6 to 10% relative to women who are, co-residents with their husbands. And they are also sort of 4 to 7% less likely to participate in non-farm businesses. So is one of the downsides of this entire story that, women have only so many hours in a day and there are just too many claims on their time. And when the partner is absent, they have to do everything for the household. They also have to engage with the political sphere. They also have to make sure, the paperwork is right. Everyone has an Aadhaar card. The kids have school admissions, so on. And also run whatever tiny bit of land that they might have or any kind of dairy farming that they may have attached to the household. So it's just going to further lead to barriers in terms of labor force participation outside of the household.
Right. So, it's definitely something that did come across. And while I agree that there are these positive kind of effects on, say, claim making, on women's lives, it is this whole situation of having a migrant husband is particularly hard. I mean, just, that separation, emotional separation itself is pretty hard. And it is a moment of kind of significant hardship in that women are stretched in terms of the labor that they provide within the household and outside. So, it's definitely a very hard situation. And I do kind of acknowledge that. And however, I do believe that, migration is kind of providing maybe other opportunities for women to be empowered that many other women with co-resident husbands, which tend to be women, coming from upper caste who have other barriers, might not, get access to, which is networks and friends and information. It's maybe unfortunate that they're kind of driven to, do this, but there is some amount of empowerment that one does accrue from just having this exposure. And while women themselves, they might think that it's significantly very difficult for them to carry out their lives like this. And I absolutely agree. I think it is bringing about some kind of, norm change or norm bending that is perhaps happening. And even to the fact that, men are recognizing the importance of women, the husbands are recognizing what the women do for the family. And the fact that it's increasing household, bargaining power and access to petty cash and things like that. So all of that might constitute, of course, some kind of positive effect, in the long run. And I think it also talks to, the fact that there are other pathways that we could perhaps pursue in empowering women, even when currently, we know how bad the labor force participation in India is, etc. So there is other things that we can think about. And all of this is not to say that, economic empowerment is not required. It of course is. But yeah, in the interim, to think about other things.
The interesting thing is, we need to change our lens when we study the global south, right? In most other places, as you mentioned at the top of the conversation, usually political empowerment is the thing that comes last in the sequence of events, right? Female seclusion has already declined. Economic empowerment is already taking place, right? Access to credit is taking place. All those things start happening, and then comes the political empowerment and contestation and so on. And that's what we've historically seen in most of the, relatively developed economies. And in the global south, it's a little bit upside down because in one sense, universal adult franchise is introduced in India very, early, right at the birth of the republic. At least on paper, there is no difference. Both men and women can stand for elections. They can vote for elections. The claim-making space is supposed to be relatively, a level playing field. But it doesn't actually happen because before we got there, we never quite solved the problems of female seclusion. We never solved the problem of labor force participation and so on. So in this sense, it's a little bit upside down. And in Bihar, that's the context we're looking at, right? Like in an upside down world where there is relatively high female seclusion and low labor force participation rate and sort of, GDP per capita that's closer to Sierra Leone than, Kerala. That's the context that we're looking at where this is sort of like a big deal that these changes are taking place.
Right. Yeah. So it's definitely kind of very interesting in that it's taking place in Bihar, as you mentioned. We've known over time it has had like low levels of economic development, also pretty low on like a lot of dimensions of like female, empowerment, like traditionally as we would see it. So, which is why kind of, this is very striking that, this male migration is bringing in these women into these spaces, and even more striking because politics in India, I mean, I think across the world, right? Like it's considered a male arena. So just that these women are the ones going and, like making claims on the state and like asking, I mean, they go and just pester their like ward members and are like, I've not got like, my money for building a toilet, or like, I want to get my Indira Awas like house. So it's just that, them going and like, doing this, it's itself is pretty striking and empowering. And I do think that they are maybe like being, they believe that they're being forced in some sense to do it because their husbands are not around. But just the presence of these women in these arenas, it was very striking to me when I did visit these places.
Does this kind of social exposure and, access to new networks, both political networks and also other women who are making these claims, does that lead to other kinds of, sort of changes within the household, especially in terms of norms? Are these women more likely, or these households more likely to educate their female children just a little bit more, because they now know the value of women, making claims in the political sphere? Or are, the unmarried sisters and sisters-in-law more likely to start participating in these spaces or attend college or something like that? Do you see much of that, especially, given that you've done so much qualitative work on the field? This would be quite interesting to know.
I mean, there's like a lot of work that has specifically looked at the effect of migration on educational outcomes. Some of it in India, some of it in China. What I did see in terms of like household dynamics, and some of it like I kind of demonstrate with, quantitatively as well. But there was this very interesting case where I was at this chowk in Araria, just outside the village, because I wanted to talk to women who were like stepping out and like taking rickshaws to like go somewhere. And I happened to meet like a couple of women, and particularly two women. They were going to see one of the woman's son was kind of marriageable age. So they were looking for like a prospective, like, I don't even know what you say. A bride. Yeah. So a bride.
A suitable girl.
Exactly. So a suitable girl for her son. And her husband was a migrant, and she was doing this trip by herself. I believe it was like her neighbor, but they all live close by. So they're like kind of related because they're all of the same kind of subcaste jati. So they were going to like this village, like much further away. They had to like kind of, transfer like 2 rickshaws, almost 2 or 3, to get to that village. And she was going to do this because her husband was not around. So she was going to kind of go and meet the family and talk to them and see if this girl, kind of fits what she's expecting. And maybe then, of course, like consult with her husband or like talk to him. But like, she's the one doing this. And this was something that was, very striking. And it's very kind of exemplar in like how women's participation in household decision making is changing because of migration, because they're having this exposure and having to do all of these duties to on behalf of the household. So yeah, I do think there is like significant like household level changes that are happening, and there's also like at the community level, I do believe there are like shifts that are occurring, and this is something that I am going to study in the future, is to just, and there was like a very quick small survey that I did of local elites. They do recognize women as being particularly discerning as citizens and voters, more than men actually, in high migration kind of contexts, and that women are more earnest, they are more likely to vote for development, and how a lot of people have told me, like women are the ones who bring us to power, like because of women we are in power. So there's a lot that's happening at the community level, in that people are recognizing how these women are at the front and center of a lot of things. So there is, of course, a lot of nuance, and household level dynamics don't change that easily, and women's restrictions do not, like, these are like very sticky things, right? I think overall there seems to be some kind of positive effect at the individual household and community level.
Because there is so much female seclusion in the areas that you're studying, normally, the state official in question, whether it's for a particular welfare entitlement or school admissions or, something else, is not likely to engage with women. They usually will tell them to come back with their husband or come back with the father or son or something like that. But now that obviously has to shift. So do you see feminization on the other side as well? That is, either they're more sensitive and willing to engage with women, or they're more willing to hire women or appoint women to these positions because there are so many women making claims and, so on. Do you also see a change in attitudes on that end?
So, yeah, I think there is some kind of shift that's happening. And that was, something that I was talking about previously. I mean, to answering your previous question. I mean, I've had people tell me things like, Mahila hi sab kuch hai, and like Mahila hai to hum jeete hain. So like some, things like that. So they do recognize women as being particularly important at the time of elections. And I do think that they recognize the presence of women in these places and make efforts to make it easier for them to actually engage with the state. I don't know if that's some kind of feminization that's happening or what, but there's enough awareness and observation of the effect and impact that women can have. And they do things like, like at some place, they had organized for like some kind of desk to be set up at the village so that women can, it's just easier for these women at one time to like submit a lot of the documents. So because they know it's women who are doing it, and it's hard for women to like leave everything that they're doing throughout the day and like take so many hours out of all of the labor that they have to do within the household and go to a block office. So they do things like this, or, they help them, like if they want to kind of sign up for something, they call someone to their home, and then they kind of help them carry out these things. So it's all of these things that perhaps could be some kind of sensitization that's happening to the fact that women are occupying these spaces.
So one of the things that's kind of hard, and maybe that's not the point of the paper, that's hard at the end of reading your paper, is what is the policy implication of these findings, right? I mean, the very broad level implication is, yes, we got to get women more engaged in the political space because it does change the landscape. There is a political responsiveness. The sort of things they ask for is more. There are all these other side benefits of networks, and, they're no longer secluded and so on. In terms of like implementable policy, are there things that come to your mind when it comes to districts where there is very large amounts of outmigration? And we know what these districts are in India, right? There are like a handful of states where there's massive outmigration. And even in those states, there are certain districts where you see this a lot.
Yeah, so I do think that, yes, as you said, like the study definitely tells us that, women are doing all of these kind of tasks and engaging with the state. So it's definitely providing evidence of that and like saying, you're just giving us descriptive, knowledge or generating knowledge on the extent to which women can engage with the state and like how they are empowered currently, right? That's always a good thing. And I think one of the other things that this project is kind of suggesting, and which I was kind of talking about a little bit earlier, was that there are like these other barriers that we could perhaps, kind of tackle first while we work around, improving women's labor force participation, which we know in India has been like a huge issue and concern. And it's like things like, what my study is saying, that you can equip women and with like networks and skills. So like maybe programs can like kind of focus on that. And of course, there's like the huge self-help group, like network, it improves like networks, and there's a lot of work on that. So it's just kind of suggesting that there are like other maybe alternate, pathways that policies can kind of target and look at in the interim while we get women, to actively participate in the labor force, and that women can be empowered politically, at least, like despite them not having that much earning autonomy. And of course, all of this is not to say that it's not important. I do significantly believe that women have to have economic earning autonomy and capacity to be like, participate as equal citizens and in any kind of context and community. So I just think that this project is definitely saying that there are other barriers we can target and other policies that can equip them with other things which can help their empowerment.
No, absolutely. And, also like overall, I think the positive message I got was these norms are sticky, but they're not as sticky as I had originally imagined, right? So there can be, we can think about sort of, educational programs, a shift in culture, right? Just a new sort of norm that emerges where women have greater participation in these spaces, which seemed so out of reach even a few decades ago that now feels within reach, and we're able to study it because of, this sort of economic shock that you're studying of out-migration. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to kind of say that, there's a lot of, what women do, they often couch in this kind of, talk of it being driven out of necessity because there's nobody else. Like, I believe that it's them trying to kind of rationalize their actions to fit within the overall kind of, normed like structure or what they're like supposed to be doing. But there is, of course, still a significant amount of kind of norm bending that's happening in what they're doing because of migration. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, that's so cool. This sounds fascinating. Thank you so much for doing this and telling us all about this research.
Thanks so much, Shruti. Thanks for having me.
Ideas of India is produced by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Help us grow by giving us a rating and leaving a review. Follow us on Twitter at @SRajagopalan and at Ideas of India. Also check out our initiative commemorating 30 years of India's market reforms at the 1991project.com.